Hello, everyone. It is Fiona here from fionamarks.com, and I am back today at the Fireside talking about presumptions that people have about Vedic astrology with my good friend and colleague, Fernando Raul Castro. Would you please introduce yourself to everyone, Fernando?
Thank you very much, Fiona. Nice to be here. And once again, I'm very honored to be in your channel. Thank you.
Thank you. Fernando and I are working our way through some really insightful comparisons that Fernando made between Vedic astrology and other types of traditional astrologies. And today we are luckily up to one of the topics that I'm most interested in, which is around 47 minutes in his video. And it's about dasas and profections, which really means that this topic that we're talking about today is about timing and different systems of timing. So I'm going to set the scene and then I'm going to dig into Fernando's brain because I want to understand this better.
Okay.
So let's just set the scene by saying that this is in the context that astrology originally was very comfortable with predicting timing. Like that's kind of what astrology was for. But of course, life in Europe became difficult over various times with various religions around astrologers predicting things because it might have been seen as being against religions or gods or against the current cultural mainstream view. And for that reason, astrology, in order to survive, has become a way of using the wisdom of astrology to understand a person and to look at their psychology. And therefore, in part, and therefore the timing side of astrology became a little bit culturally dangerous at times, and perhaps some of the timing wisdom got lost or dropped out of a kit bag of an astrologer. Just let's focus on what's safe. So there's some of this that we're putting together like a jigsaw puzzle, bringing back in things into astrology. So I just wanted to set that context. And maybe, Fernando, do you want to say anything more about that before I ask you a question?
Oh, that is totally correct as I have understood it. But I have to emphasize that that was part of the reason why, for example, today in modern astrology, psychological extrapolations are more prevalent than timing techniques. One of that was that in several European countries, there were what are called fortune-telling laws, and in the States, which made it illegal to do fortune-telling. So people had to do other stuff like talk about your sign, sun sign, your planet's their sign, and how that would manifest in your conduct. But that is just one of the reasons why these techniques have just fell out of favor until very recently with the new, renaissance going on with traditional astrology. There are other reasons in terms of epistemological paradigms and how things change after the 17th, 18th century with the scientific revolutions. But more recently, this is a reason why, specifically at the late 19th and early 20th century, a lot of these techniques were either unknown, ignored, or just avoided.
Yes. Yep. Okay, great. So this is the context of timing.
Yes.
Now, one of the things that people think they know about Vedic astrology is that Vedic astrology uses the dasha system.
Yes.
Or that it uses the Vimshottari dasha system.
Yes.
But in your video, you help to remind us all that there are other sorts of dasha systems in Vedic astrology. So tell us a little bit about, why is it that Vedic astrology gets associated with Vimshottari dasha system so strongly?
This is a very cool subject because there's a lot of things going on, and I want to talk about a lot of things because it's very cool. First of all, let's start from the beginning. We did an introduction just now, but let's just divide the chart, right? Let's just divide the chart in malleable, recognizable terms.
Okay.
When I am with students, I always tell them that you should see the chart in terms of points and areas, right?
Yes.
But that only relates to the idea of passive significators, right?
Okay.
So you have to divide the chart into passive significators and active significators, right? So passive significators relate to the astrological significators that are always there. They're there, right?
Okay.
But they're not active, necessarily speaking. So we're talking about points and areas, planets per sign, houses, ascendants, cause, that sort of thing. It's like the whole map, right?
Okay.
But as you know, as you know through the apprenticeship course, there are timing techniques and things lit up. So you divide the chart between the passive significators and the active significators, because the only thing that we have is the eternal present. So certain things are on a particular time. So
Okay.
those relate to the passive significators that are active. So the active significators relate to the timing significators that are happening right now.
Okay.
It can be one, it can be two, it can be a lot, depending on the different timing tools that you use. So you have to do that division, right? So you have passive significators, which are the whole of the chart as it is, right? And active significators, the parts of that whole chart that are activated right now. For example, right now I am in a dasha of Jupiter, and I've been
Okay.
in it for a long time, for the past uh, 13 years, more or less, right?
Okay.
You are in what dasha are you right now in
I am
Vimshottari, for example?
also in Jupiter
Oh,
Dasha.
look at that. Look at that. Great. So we're connected.
Two
Afterwards comes Saturn.
astrologers.
So we got to work a lot. But the point is that right now, the Saturn agendas are manifesting themselves in our lives.
The Jupiter agendas. Yeah.
I'm sorry, what did I say?
Saturn.
Oh, I'm sorry. The
That's all right.
Jupiter agendas are manifesting right now in our life. Not the Saturn agendas, not the Venus agendas, although they will also manifest, but through the bhuktis, right? The
Yes.
sub periods, the sub period, the sub periods, and the sub periods, and whatever. You only look at three. Forget about the fourth and the fifth. That is I don't recommend that. But the point is that although some people do for rectification, but that's another topic. The point is that that is the active significator right now. So you got to have that in mind. And for a long time in traditional astrology, astrology was used for timing techniques, to know when things will happen, to understand space through time and the number, right? In simple terms. So those techniques were always there, and that was the principal thing that astrology was used for, to figuring out when I was going to get married, when would I get paid, when would I achieve the favor of the king, when would I recover my lost things. It was not to go to the astrologer to ask him, hey, talk to me about my strengths and my weaknesses. Talk to me about how I am. I mean, it's not about that. That is, in my opinion, a modern expression that was there before, without a doubt, but it was secondary to the practical use. Now, that has fallen out from favor, and the psychological extrapolations due to the manifestation of modern astrology have become prime. And that is because of the paradigms, because of the laws we talked about, and simply because of ignorance, of not like apropos ignorance, but just involuntary ignorance of the whole tradition that came before this counter renaissance of modern astrology that started, as I said, in the 17th, 18th century, and took a lot of strength after the 19th century and the early 20th. So we have that introduction. And I have to explain that because this is very important. Now, everybody knows, or not everybody, but people who are familiar with Vedic astrology always say the same things, like Vedic astrology is very accurate. Vedic astrology is so good because they have something called dasas.
Okay.
And in the modern context, specifically in the Western context, there is this idea, this popular idea, that only Jyotish has the timing techniques, that only Jyotish has dashas, right? And I thought that like 10 years ago, I would say, wow, then I'm gonna study Jyotish because that's the real astrology, because I want to know when things happen. And you figure out a lot of things as you go by. One thing is that, number one, Jyotish is not the only astrology that uses timing tools. Number two, dashas are not the only timing tools in existence. Not only in Jyotish, there are other timing things in Jyotish, which we're going to talk about, but there are timing tools in other astrologies. And number three, Vimshottari is not the only dasha. There are other dashas that are mentioned in the classics. So that is a reason why people think about Vedic astrology in this way in the modern context, principally because, first of all, Vedic astrology is an invented term. The correct term is Jyotish, or Hindu astrology. But after the war, specifically in the 60s and 70s, the idea of Vedic astrology came to the States and Europe, mainly through people like Chakrapani Ulal, Dr. Frawley. You also have Neranda Nesai. These people who came in, right? But also with the whole movement of ISKCON type, Vaishnava type people, Hare Krishna movement that made a little renaissance of all this Vedic knowledge in the 60s and 70s. And then you repackage the whole thing with the name of Vedic astrology and present it as a new thing, as a new consumerist item. And you have the initial way of how Vedic astrology came to the zeitgeist of the Western societies after the war. And now, after the 90s and 2000s, we're starting to reincorporate a lot of things and starting to see how things are from the academic perspective. So that's a brief introduction to have that. So number one, there are other timing tools than Vimshottari, both in Jyotish and in other astrologies. And at the same time, you can use a lot of them. And Vimshottari is not the only one. So I just want to start with that brief introduction to talk about. So I don't know where we proceed from here, if you have any questions so far.
No, I think that's great. We just want to establish that accidentally people associate Vedic astrology with the only astrology that has dasha or timing systems, and that's not correct, because other astrologies also have timing systems. And then, in fact, Vimshottari is not the only dashing system that is mentioned in the classics. So why is it that we don't, in Vedic astrology, use many of these other dasha systems as well? So these are little mysteries for us. But bringing it back to your video, one of the things that I was wanting to learn more about is that in other traditional astrologies, there is an idea that you mentioned called Profections.
Correct.
Which is based on signs and how they relate to the ascendant.
Yes, that is probably, and I'm not an expert, the oldest timing system there is. And that exists in all astrologies. It exists even in Jyotish. Of course, in Jyotish, you have other applications like Charadasha, for example, within the Jaimini techniques. But if you read Brihat Parashara Horashastra, you will see that the timing systems divide themselves into the Janma nakshatra timing systems based on the position of the moon by the nakshatra of the natal moon, and what are called sign dashas, which the most famous of them is Charadasha, which would be, let's say, the Vimshottari of the sign dashas. But Profections is probably the oldest system, and most importantly, the most simple.
Yes.
And I use that. I've been using that a while now. And I think Profections is the best system there is because it's simple, it's versatile, and you can use it within other timing techniques. Now, before we start, let's talk about the timing techniques within Jyotish. And I just want to take this out of the question. People are familiar with Vimshottari, which is the Vimshottari time system of 120 years, 27 nakshatras, 108 padas, and 9 planetary heralds. Remember, planets do not rule nakshatras. Planets are associated to nakshatras within a timing system. Okay, this is very important because this is something.
This will be another video. This will be another video.
This is something, unfortunately, that people repeat because people don't realize how things work and they just repeat what they're told. But the idea is that Vimshottari is there. But if you go to Brihat Parashara Horashastra, the second volume, you go to chapter 46, you are going to see that there are several timing systems based on the position of the moon, of which Vimshottari is only one. And if I'm not mistaken, there are 10. And in each one, the planets relate to the nakshatras in different situations. For example, people know that, people know that Ashlesha is ruled by Mercury in Vimshottari, but in Ashottari Dasha, which is another one, is ruled by the sun. For example, there is Shodoshotari, Ashlesha there is ruled by Mars, and so on and so forth. Some of these timing systems have 9 planets, some of them have 8, some of them have 7. Okay?
So a
lot of varieties. Now the question comes, why do we use Vimshottari? Nobody knows. But it is the principal one. I think it has to do with the number 108 of how the scheme of 108 spaces relates to the chart. There was a time also when people were thinking that Ashtotari was also like the other one because it has 108 years. But in the end, Vimshottari came out.
Okay.
Where is the reasoning behind the years of the dashas? Nobody knows. The order of the planets, nobody knows. Dr. Foss has come up with an idea in recent years in an essay he did. Andrew Foss is the founder of Jyotish Star, and he's associated to the Vedic Astrology community of Britain, of Camilla Sutton and Sanjay Rath and all that. So he has come up with an idea, but the idea is that nobody really knows.
Okay.
So take that into consideration. In addition to the Janma Nakshatra timing systems, you also have the sign systems, which is related to Charadasha, which is more related to Jaimini, although Parashara talks about them. So in essence, these are two timing systems, but there's also another one which relates also to perfections within Jyotish, which is done, and also to solar returns, which is done in Jyotish through Varsaphala, which comes from Perso-Arab astrology that came in late in the tradition, probably after the 8th or 9th century AD into India. So as you can see, there's a lot, but
Yes.
I recommend perfections. And if you want, I can explain them to you.
Exactly. So we're going to move over and have a look at a chart, and we pick on one of our favorite subjects. Let me see, where is share screen? Because he just lives his life so publicly. We have here Donald Trump.
Okay. Make America great again.
Oh, please. So let's pause here for just looking at the layout of Kala. We have been talking about, in this bottom left corner, the Vimshottari dasha system, and this actually is the sign dasha system that you were talking about as well, isn't it? These are the main.
No, that's another one. That's
Okay.
Karanavamsha. That's done in the D9. You can look it
Okay.
up in Chara, I believe, but that
Okay.
is another one. That is another one.
Okay. All right, but these are standard when they're kind of locked onto the main screen of Kala when you arrive here.
Yes.
Okay, so I think we've spoken enough, but I just want to check that we've spoken enough about Vimshottari dasha system. Oh, but I do have one follow-up question, which is Vimshottari dasha system, or any of those 10 that are in Parashara, are they in the other traditional astrologies?
No.
Okay, so that
is a reason why they are particular, because they're related to the Janma Nakshatra. They're related to the nakshatra, to the Vedic lunar mansion, specifically within the scheme of 27. However, there are two within these 10 that have 28, including the famous Abhijit, that most people don't know how to explain why it's there, which is another topic for another time. But the idea is that these are particularly here. Now, is it possible that these timing systems existed in other astrologies and or only survived in Jyotish? It is probable. I wouldn't say it is 100% sure, but the idea is that these only exist here because of the importance, as I said in a previous video, of the nakshatras within Vedic techniques.
Exactly. So that's something that we can really honor about the heritage of these time systems. Okay.
Yes.
So, and there's obviously lots of research to go there, and hopefully we will learn more and more and more. But now let's move to this idea of perfections that you were sharing, that we can estimate is a very ancient form of timing because it's very simple.
Yes, it's ridiculously simple.
I know.
People who are not familiar with them are going to be in shock of how simple it is.
Okay, so let's take our chart.
Or I'm sorry, how simple it is in the beginning. There you go.
All right, so let's take our chart here. Now, for this, I need to know, in order to work out perfections, I need to know where the ascendant is. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and so I am happily situated here now in Leo with my ascendant in Leo. That is my starting point for perfections.
And I have to add that you should use whole sign house system.
Okay, so that's important.
Yes.
Okay, now tell us why is this ascendant important for perfections? What do I do from here?
Okay, the first thing is that the premise of perfections is the following. Each house is 1 year of life of the native.
Okay.
So where do you start? You always start from the ascendant.
Okay.
So our first year of life comes from the moment we come out of our mother and we breathe through our own lungs. We are 0 years old. So the first perfection will be from 0 to 1 year, which will correspond obviously to the ascendant.
Okay.
So the ascendant will be the number 0. The second year of our life corresponds to the second house, which would be when we're 1 year old.
Yeah.
The third to 2 years old. The fourth to 3. The fifth to 4. And so on and so forth until you reach the ascendant when you're once again 12.
Okay.
And then you repeat the whole cycle, 24. And then you repeat the whole cycle, 36. And then you repeat it, 48. And then you repeat it, 60. And then if you live, you are 72. And then 84, and so on and so forth until you die.
Okay. All right. So it's going around and around. Now, interestingly, we have the number 0 here, right? So for the rest of astrology, there's no 0. It's the first house is the first house. 4 houses away, you start counting from 1, 2, 3, 4. But in this case, you get a 0.
Actually, it's a funny question because there is a perfection technique in Jyotish where they start number 1 in the first house, but that is controversial. But it is 0, precisely because when you are born, you're 0 years old. You're like a minute old, a second old. So you're not 1 until you reach your first solar return, which is technically your first year of life, which would be like the beginning would be in the second.
Yes, yes. I just noticed that difference, right? Because I struggled with that at first, that in astrology there's no 0.
Yes,
but in this
that
case,
is mathematically fuzzy. But I wanna say something. So by this premise, we can extrapolate, for example, that when you're 12, 24, 36, 48, 60, there are changes, deep changes within you. Why? Because the perfection is of the ascendant.
Okay.
Now,
Perfection
when you are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, when you're 6 is too young, but 6, when you are 26 plus 12 is, oh my God,
18.
6,
I'm
8.
here. I've got your back.
Okay, when you're 18, when you are 18 plus 12 is 30, right? When you're 18, when you're 30, the 7th house will be activated. So that is a time of relationships and so on and so forth.
Okay. Oh, fascinating. All right, we've got things to look at there. Okay,
but
so
only in principle, because things get more complicated as we go by.
Yes. Okay, so let's say that's perfections, is that the year of your birth, you work it out in relation to the ascendant, and you will end up in a house and in a sign. Okay. And you can know.
And Fiona, let me add, if you take this, if you logically extrapolate what I'm saying, then if you have bad dignity planets in certain houses, when the perfection of that house within that sign comes up, that planet is going to get activated. So if you have Saturn in Aries and he's in the 4th house, when obviously you're going to have problems with your house, right? Or problems with your parents, right?
Okay.
Or problems that are not seen to others. That is something that is, once again, a passive significator. It's there. Now, an active significator would be like when the perfection of the 4th house comes.
Yeah.
So in that time in particular, that idea of the malefic, badly dignified planet will manifest itself. And at the same time, if you have a benefic planet, let's say a Jupiter in Cancer in the 9th house, you're going to be great in long trips, studying, religious, spiritual, excellent. But when that perfection comes, that is going to get activated. Now, the fruit can be bad or good, but that has to be leveled with other tools that we're going to talk about.
Okay. All right. Great. Now, in your video, around 50 minutes, you say that we can combine perfections with solar returns.
Yes.
And then I was like, okay, now I don't understand perfections, and now I don't understand solar returns either.
Yes.
So, but in the video now, I've got my head around perfections. Tell us about solar returns and how do we see that on Kala? What do we call it in Vedic astrology?
Okay, several things. First of all, Ryan Kursak told us that a good astrologer always uses more than one timing system.
Yep.
My other professor, my other teacher before Ryan, Mark Boney, would talk to me about the slot machine technique.
Yep.
The idea
Tell us
that
the
you
slot
use
machine technique.
yes, the idea that you use 3 timing system at least, and if they all line up, boom, prediction.
Yep.
But
Bing, bing,
what's
bing,
the
bing,
problem?
bing.
Exactly. What's the problem? You almost never will get them to line up. Because as I said, they're different timing tools.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So
but life is complex. Life doesn't normally have one flavor.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Tell me about it. But the thing is that if they line up, when they line up, I just get happy. I smile and I say, yes, I got a prediction. Because it's so hard to get a rock solid prediction sometimes. Even though it's not rock solid, but I mean, it's all the signs are pointing to that point. But that usually never happens, as you might know, and other people who are watching might know. But the thing is that you use several timing techniques.
Yep.
So the idea of perfections, you mix it with the solar returns. Now, what is a solar return? Well, the phrase says it. It's the idea when the sun returns to the position it was when you were born, which is also called in popular culture your birthday. So years in astrology do not begin in January 1st, or even unless you were born on January 1st. They start in your birthday. Okay. So what happens when the sun returns to the same position in terms of zodiacal longitude of degrees, minutes, and seconds? You make a chart. And that chart will predetermine how the year will go.
Okay.
But what you do is that you mix the perfection with the solar return chart. And for example, here we have the chart of Donald Trump, one of the best presidents that the US has had in recent years. So basically, you have the Lagna.
Okay.
Right there.
Yes, we do. Leo.
So let's remember the Lagna. It's Leo.
Okay.
Okay. Now you go to screens.
Yes.
And you go to Varsaphala.
All the way down. Here we go.
And let's go there. For those who do not know, Varsaphala is the Jyotish term for solar returns. Why? Because solar returns come from Perso-Arab astrology and came into India probably after the 8th or 9th century AD. Varsaphala is actually a Persian word for Arab.
Okay.
But the Sanskrit term of Varsaphala, some people say that it's the word for Persian, but it's actually the word for Arab within the Persian context. So there you have it. That's Jyotish syncretism. The idea is that Varsaphala is solar return. It's the same thing, and it's like the third and last big change in Jyotish, which came very late in the tradition. We're talking about the 8th or 9th century AD, very late, even though it was almost 1300 years ago, but it's very late. So basically, they took those ideas of Perso-Arab astrology that also comes from Hellenistic context, and they applied it to the Jyotish context. So you go to Varsaphala, and remember, what was the Lagna for Donald Trump?
Leo.
So you go to that first square, and you see he's a 74 in the solar return.
Yes.
So we do the thing: 12, 24, 36, 48, 60, 72. So we start in Leo 72.
Yep.
Virgo is 73.
Yep.
And Libra is 74.
Yep.
So Donald Trump, and we see the date right there, from June 2020 to June 2021, will have a third house Libra perfection. Okay? And you can see it right there in the third line called the Muntha, which is the Jyotish Sanskrit word for the perfected sign and house.
Okay.
So this is the tip of the iceberg, and I'm just going to stick with this because as I said, it gets more complicated as we go by. But the thing is that, number one, from June 2020 till June 2021, Donald Trump is in a third house perfection, which has to do with brothers. If I'm not mistaken, his brother died last year, probably by August or something. At the same time, it has to do with the courage, the initiative, and all the things that have to do with the third house. But it also has to do with Libra, and as a consequence, has to do with Venus. So we have the third house, Libra, and Venus activated. So we go to the solar return chart, and we have to see two things. We have to see Venus, because he's the Lord of the third house, perfected, and we have to see how it is dignified here. And we also have to see the ascendant in the solar return chart, which in this case is Cancer. So the two principal planets that we're going to see to start off will be the moon, which is the Lord of the Lagna, which falls in the 12th house from the natal Lagna. So that is not good. And the moon is here in Pisces with Mars, which is not that good. If I'm not mistaken, it's also square. Well, I'm not going to do all the calculations, but if I'm not mistaken, I think it's void of course. Or no, it's not void of course. It is conjunct by trine to Jupiter. Okay, so basically you see the moon as the Lord of the solar return chart, and you also look at Venus as the Lord of the perfected house. And we're going to stop there because this is just basically the tip of the iceberg.
Exactly.
Because there are other techniques, there are several techniques that you can use, because this was the principal method of timing, and it still is, to my opinion, with the most amount of literature in terms of how you would time people's lives year to year. And there are other timing techniques that are very good, like Firdaria, which is also another one that you can use, which I use, which will more or less divide the chart in time periods like the dasas. It's probable that the dasas might have originated from timing techniques related to Firdarias in the Hellenistic context. I don't know. It's just a presupposition. But the idea is that there are several techniques, and we've spoken about them so far. Dasas, sign dasas, profections. We also have solar returns. We have Firdarias, and we also have other which are progressions, which we haven't spoken, and we're not going to talk about them because it would be a very long video. But as you can see, dasas is not the only system. And there are other systems, much older, simpler, and easier to understand, but just in the beginning. Then it gets more complicated.
But it gives one that ability to do, as, what did you call it, slot machine, or like your
yes,
we call it in Australia, we call it the pokies. I don't know whether that's a
universal. The pokies, that's really Australian.
Yeah, sorry, it must be for poker machine. I think it must be for poker machine.
The pokies. But, you know,
the pokies, yeah, Australians love to
like Gumby's horse.
We like to shorten words. Everything's got to get shorter. So poker machines is just too long. It's the pokies. But what you're talking about is that you get, say, 3 things lining up, and you get this kind of confirmation that there are many factors in the chart that are predicting or leading to this event. But
they seldom line up. They seldom
line up. Okay.
Yes. For example, yesterday I had a client, and I had like 2 out of 4, and I was like, yes, I have something here. I you know, she's getting her money's worth, precisely because, you know, and when they don't line up, then you gotta tell them it's like that. That's how life is. It's like it's raining or it's sunny, and you have to accept whatever it comes.
Definitely, exactly, and yeah, that's how life is. Fernando, I think we have covered, you have given me now, like, what you whet my appetite for in the video was that there were these other timing systems. Today, I feel like, thank you for holding my hand and walking my way through those. Now I've got some other timing methods and techniques that I can use that fill out the timing systems that I'm already using. Give me just another bit of data, another look at what might be happening. So I very much appreciate your time, and I look forward to seeing you next week. I'm just going to have a look at what we're going to talk about next week, so we can begin thinking about it. The 11th house. We're going to talk about.
Oh, great! That's a good one.
It is.
That's a cool one. The 11th house. Yes.
So join us next time when we talk about how the 11th house is perceived differently in different styles of astrology. All right. Great speaking with you, friend. Talk to you.
Ciao. Take care.
Bye-bye.